Our second feature story is on a successful Greek-American music and arts public relations specialist, Renee Pappas. Renee Pappas entered the music business in the late 1960s when Los Angeles was the capital of rock and roll music. She began her career at the international famous agency, which represented The Doors, Alice Cooper, and Iron Butterfly. She then moved on to become director of personal appearances for the Beach Boys. When David Geffen started Asylum Records, she moved to Geffen Roberts Management, which nurtured careers of the Eagles, Jackson Browne, Neil Young, and Joni Mitchell. In 1972, Renee married Jerry Wexler, the co-founder of Atlantic Records and designated godfather of rock and roll, and she moved to New York. In the area of international public relations, her client list spans the breadth of contemporary Greek cultural life, the Benaki Museum, the Heraklion Museum, the Elisa and Basil Goulandris Museum, the Kostopoulos Foundation, and Art Athena. She served as an advisor to the Greek Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Renee is back in the States today and currently has a key role as a member of the advisory board of the Chicago Blues Experience. Let's hear all about her amazing journey.
My background is Greek. My maternal grandparents came from a village called Vervina, which is in Arcadia, way high up in the mountains. My father came from a village called Varvasana, which is sort of halfway between ancient Olympia and Pyrgos. So I'm all Peloponnesian. I was born in Chicago and lived in Chicago till I was about 9 years old when my dad died. And then my mother and my sister and I moved to California and grew up there. My mother and dad were introduced by a common friend, and this is right after World War II. My grandfather, who had come over in 1897 and went into partnership with two brothers who then brought over their sister, who he then married, they had grocery stores, right? You either have a grocery store or a restaurant, one of the two. And my grandfather and his partners, my grandmother's brothers, had, I think, 3 or 4 grocery stores. So my mother was raised with the church, with, I think they were some of the founding fathers of Gimisis, and that was in the 1920s and 30s and so forth. The great story is my father coming to the United States. This is incredible. My dad was in love with this girl in the village and in Varvasana, and there was a bandit who was in love with her called Katsiko Petros, okay, get this. And so there was a gunfight in the town square between my father and this guy. And anyway, the guy then ran away, and my father's older brothers decided that they all had to get out of the country or else they were either going to get arrested or get caught up in a vendetta. So they all left. And somehow they got passports. I even have his passport. It's actually interesting because it's in French and Greek, his passport. And they somehow got themselves out, and they went to Massachusetts initially. And then they went to Chicago. And my father owned barbershops and a bar and just all sorts of things. And then he and my mother were introduced by, I don't know if it was a real proxino or something, but anyway, they met and they were married. And then I came along and my sister. And we lived in Chicago until my dad died. I was about 8 and a half. And then we moved to Southern California. In my teenage years, my sister and I hung out with a lot of surfers in Huntington Beach and Newport Beach. A friend of the family bought a club in Huntington Beach called the Golden Bear, which was essentially a folk club, and then started booking acts that were coming along, what you would call folk rock acts. When Dylan went electric and so on, all these things started happening. And eventually, he would ask my sister and I to go up to see bands at the Whiskey, at concerts, and we were essentially booking the club. So we got to meet everyone, the Buffalo Springfield, the Byrds, Janis Joplin. In 1967, we went to the Monterey Pop Festival, which of course brought in all sorts of different acts. You had the LA acts, the Byrds, the Buffalo Springfield. You had the San Francisco acts, the Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, and of course Janis Joplin, who was a phenomenon. And then you had all of these English acts coming in that no one in the US had seen at that point. The Who, Jimi Hendrix. It was an incredible event because you had so many different styles of music, so many different kinds of musicians, and everybody together for 3 days. It was probably one of the most amazing 3 days I've ever spent in my life. And that summer at the club, at the Golden Bear, we booked all of them. And eventually my sister and I got into the real music business. And I became an agent at well, it was then Ashley Famous, then it became IFA. We had the Doors, we had Alice Cooper, we had Iron Butterfly, and then a bit later, the Beach Boys asked me to work for them. So I ran their personal appearance department, which meant that I was dealing with them and all of their concerts and so forth. And at that point, they had played at the closing of the Fillmore East, and on the same bill were the Grateful Dead and the Allman Brothers. And my future husband, Jerry Wexler, had recorded that album. And I was asked to have a meeting with him several months later, and that's how I met him, over the Beach Boys. Then after that, I left the Beach Boys and I went to work for David Geffen, who had just started a record label called Asylum Records. And on that label, of course, were the Eagles and Jackson Browne and Linda Ronstadt. And of course, we all became great friends at that time. And then I eventually married Jerry and moved to New York. Now, Jerry was a partner in Atlantic Records. He became a partner in Atlantic Records in the early 50s, along with Ahmet and Nesui Erdogan. The artists that they had at the beginning, Ray Charles, the Drifters, the Coasters, Ruth Brown, all these legends. Then eventually they were signing rock and roll acts as well. Their first white artist was Bobby Darin. Then Jerry signed Aretha Franklin and was producing all of her hits, of course, Wilson Pickett. He then went on later when we were together and he produced Bob Dylan's two albums with Bob Dylan. Actually, that was the first time Bob ever won a Grammy, was the album that Jerry produced with him. And he also produced Dire Straits. He produced a number of very, very interesting artists over the years. I mean, and I think one of the most exciting events that we went to is he was nominated for an Academy Award for the soundtrack of Pretty Baby. And that was a film that Louis Malle directed with Brooke Shields and Susan Sarandon and Keith Carradine. Anyway, it was a terrific film. He was nominated for an Academy Award. We went, of course. It was great, but he lost. We had an apartment in Manhattan on Park Avenue, and we had a house in East Hampton. So at both houses, we entertained. We entertained a lot. I averaged one dinner party a week, sometimes two. And the people that came to the dinner party could be everyone from Bob Dylan to Mark Knopfler and Dire Straits. Linda Ronstadt was at our house many, many times, especially when Jerry was producing an album with her, a jazz album. People like Teddy Pendergrass, Aretha, the members of the Modern Jazz Quartet. So many artists, so many people. We just had a marvelous time, both in the city and in the country. And then, of course, in the country, people would stay over the weekend. So that was pretty wild, actually, dealing with everybody. It was a big house, so we had we had a lot of guest rooms. So it was quite wild, actually, sometimes the people that would show up. We had a really interesting group of people coming through the house, and it was an incredible time. Paul Simon lived nearby. We were very close to Paul. and Shelley Duvall, who is a great friend of mine still. It was a really amazing time because you also had you had music people, you had film people, you also had this whole thing going on with Saturday Night Live, which was amazing because Lorne Michaels also lived out there. So it was an incredible era, and Lorne started a tradition of doing a party at the end of the summer that he called the White Party. And so everybody had to show up in white. And the McCartneys, Paul and Linda, would always come in at that point in August in the summer with all their kids because, of course, her father, Lee Eastman, had a house in the Hamptons. Her father, Lee, was a very well-known music business lawyer. And so Jerry knew him quite well. So there would be all of them out there, the McCartneys and so forth, and Lorne Michaels, and it was great. I didn't really speak Greek. I went to 1 year of Greek school. And after my dad died, my mother really wasn't speaking Greek that much and so forth. And we were in Southern California. Of course, we went to church and Sunday school and all of that. And then after Jerry and I separated, I met a Greek. I met an actor called Spiros Fokas, who had a long career in Italy. He'd made a lot of wonderful films there with Luchino Visconti and the Tavianis, and he was then living in Greece. And we met, and we had a wild courtship, and then we got married. And at that time, then I suggested to Spiro that he needed an agent in London, and he did get an agent. And the first thing that happened is he got the film Jewel of the Nile with Michael Douglas and Kathleen Turner and Danny DeVito, and he was the villain. And he played this Gaddafi character. And the thing that was really kind of hilarious after that was in one of the scenes in the movie, he wears this white uniform with these gold epaulets and all these incredible medals and everything. And like a month after the movie came out, Gaddafi was wearing the same thing the next time you saw him. And interestingly enough, too, when he was making that movie, Spiro has to give this speech to his people. And he gave it in Arabic. Of course, he did it phonetically. But this, you know, with shooting, this takes days and days and days. Okay. So he would come down from that, and these Moroccan extras, they really thought he was the new guy. And they wanted to touch him. Because in Arab society, if you touch someone who's powerful or who's whatever, that's good luck for you. Well, I think when I married Spiro, I'd been always very serious, extremely, I'm still organized, but the point is I was very aware when I was married to Jerry because he was so much older than I was. I didn't want to appear flitty and so on and so forth. So I was always very serious. I mean, when I was married to Jerry, I was even president of the board of our co-op building. Well, I mean, Jerry and I had a 30-year difference, so I was always attempting to be serious and older and so on and so forth. Spiro, of course, was a Zorba-like character, you know, sort of free spirit and so forth, and yes, there were lots of things that I certainly never even imagined doing. I mean, going to Bazookia, I mean, forget it. I mean, you know, being out until all hours of the evening, you know. So this was a whole new adventure for me. As an American living in Greece, it was very interesting for me during that time because it was the early 1980s. It still felt a little remote. There was no internet. Greek TV was on like 4 hours a day or something. I mean, it was definitely a different, the shops closed, the supermarkets at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I mean, it was totally another world, and trying to get just the daily living and how to get things done. I knew a lot of people because Jerry had a rather large art collection. So I had met Alexander Yolas in New York, and I knew a lot of people in the art world. I met Ian Voress and all sorts of people. And so I started getting involved in the arts. I mean, I was always involved and interested and so forth, but in Greece, yes, I got involved very much in the arts. And actually, after Spiro di Giulio the Nile, we moved to LA, and we were there, and he did a number of films. He did Rambo 3 and a number of TV things, Murder, She Wrote, and all sorts of things. But in any case, we broke up. And strangely enough, after we broke up, I decided to move to Greece back to Greece on my own. And I was working with producers called David and Zev Braun, who were producing a mini-series on Alexander the Great for the Turner Network. And we were proceeding with it. I was liaisoning with different levels of the Greek government about extras, about this, that, and the other. Anyway, unfortunately, it never happened. But once I got there and I was in Greece and I'd purchased an apartment overlooking the ancient Agora, which was quite lovely and romantic and all that sort of thing, I started working with a number of museums like the Benoiki, the Galandris Museum in Andros, with the municipality of Rhodes, and I was very busy doing international press for them. Then eventually I was appointed on the board of the Zappian Foundation, and I was then appointed as an advisor to the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Thodoros Kasimis. And so I got very involved in Greek cultural life, and then 2 years ago I moved back to the United States, to my hometown, Chicago. I really enjoyed the time I spent in Greece because I was working on so many different levels promoting Greek culture. In addition to working with the museums and galleries and sometimes individual artists, I also worked with CNN, bringing one of the art shows to shoot in Greece on 3 different occasions. I was dealing with international press at Euronews, at Wall Street Journal, and what was really terrific for me was I got a great deal of satisfaction out of seeing these stories being broadcast and in print, and I felt that I was really contributing to promoting Greek culture internationally. And I enjoyed that. And it was actually quite a lovely time in Greece because leading up to the Olympics, there was a positive feeling. The museums, the municipalities were able to afford to bring journalists. I used to put together press junkets of anywhere from a dozen to even 20 of the foreign press, and it was a win-win situation because the museums or the cultural institutions got great press internationally, and I felt that I was really doing something wonderful. So I was always working with people who were involved in art, in culture, and it was very rewarding for me. Unfortunately, when the crisis hit, of course, the first thing that gets cut is culture. And so you saw all of these things happening with museums closing an extra day or even 2 days a week, no budgets for publicity, and it was a very, very, very sad situation. And I think I looked at the whole situation, and the Greece that I enjoyed, and the Greece that I admired, and the Greece that I worked so hard to promote was falling apart. I'm now living in Chicago. I'm on the advisory board of a new museum that will open called the Chicago Blues Experience, which is about the blues. And it's really fun for me and really exciting, and I've been, again, through that, reconnecting with a lot of my music business pals from many, many decades past, and that's very exciting. I'm now collaborating with an art gallery in Chicago, Hilton Asmus Contemporary, and incredibly, by chance, they had represented a wonderful Greek artist called Kostis Georgiou, and we have an exhibition coming up in February of 2016. In addition to that, I'm also creating exhibitions on rock and roll photographers, and we have an exhibition coming up in September with the photographs of Corinthia West, Patty Boyd, and Henry Diltz. And we're also doing a number of others over the summer that will be coinciding with the blues and jazz festivals and the Grateful Dead concerts that are coming up in July. So my whole music thing is coming full circle, and I'm enjoying that immensely. And both with the museum, the Blues Museum, and with the gallery.
Say that you're proud to be Greek and you're very upset about what's going on, but blah, 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 blah. Let's close it off.
I'm very proud to be Greek. I spent a number of years in Greece promoting the things that I believe are important, which is art and culture. And all I can say is that I hope that there is a light soon at the end of the tunnel and that things will turn around. Unfortunately, many times in order for things to change, things have to come to a turning point.